in the 80s, we had inflation at 14.6%.
Mm-hmm.
So I can say, hey, I lived through a crazy time, crazier than what we're experiencing today.
What was the first mortgage rate you had?
The forced mortgage, I was just going to say, that did stop me from us making the move into our first home. So I had to hold off on that because that mortgage rate at that was like almost 16 or so percent.
Right.
But when I bought our first house, the first mortgage rate was like 10.
Mm-hmm.
And then shortly after, I could refinance and come down. Such. So yeah, it was kind of crazy. This new phase, this is what I have to try to redefine.
The lessons you're going to learn firsthand will apply to anybody in different areas of their own pursuits.
Morning, Jay.
Morning. Welcome back to another long-awaited episode of the next episode.
Yeah, it's been a minute or 6 since we've been together, but a lot happening for you. But first of all, again, for those stopping in and visiting us here, just belated Happy New Year, even though this is, March 2nd already.
Mm-hmm.
Time continues to move along, considering last time we were together, we were just doing a checkup on my progress and transitioning to the Encore phase. And here I am now, first year behind me already. So that's kind of crazy to think that one point I always thought the time might slow down a little bit, obviously, since, when you're not working, going 150 miles an hour and back-to-back meetings and calls, that things might slow down a little bit. But honestly, time doesn't slow down. It just kind of keeps on rolling in a different way. Before we jump into continuing where we left off, I first want to say, congrats to you. You've had a lot kind of happening in the second half of last year to the beginning of this year. Kind of your new mantra of, leading people through spirit, mind, body, and money. The change from pursuit to your daily notes. For those checking in with us today, you need to look at this new phase that Jay's going through in his daily notes. So what is that, Jay? Justin at IO. What's your?
No,
I just click.
JustinCastelli.io.
Okay,
yeah.
So just kind of throwing that plug in there. Plus, you got the new book you collaborated with many of your advisors from your community coming out in March. So a lot of good stuff on top of all of the great efforts. You continue to pour into RLS Wealth and your clients. More than money. Yeah.
Yep.
So, okay, I'm done giving your plugs.
I appreciate it.
I know you don't like that. You say things should just kind of happen, and indeed that's true. But also we've learned, through our own lives, and definitely me through mine, sometimes you got to blow your own horn, and make it happen. So kind of taking this moment for the few of you that are chiming in. Do check those things out. They're good. So let's see, Jay, last time we did a checkup, it was kind of how I was progressing, how I'm moving through transition. One thing we didn't hit upon was obviously timing is everything. So for me, the idea to make the decision to retire and move into obviously what I've labeled, my Encore phase, we had the wonderful change to the economy, right? So we thought we might talk a little bit around what does that bring to your plan, if anything. So, I'll admit out of the gate, I did think about that a little bit before pulling the ripcord last December, because even then, in 2021, economy was still moving along fairly well. Signs were beginning to surface a little bit. The things were changing. Obviously, we had, kind of pricing starting to increase, the war in Ukraine starting to push some pressure on the markets. So I was like, well, okay, what do I do about that? Of course, my advisor, would always say, hey, you're in it for the long haul. Forget the noise. Just sit down, let it rest. Even if it drops, it'll come back. And as much as I agree with him, my advisor would be a little disappointed in me in that, I am checking a little bit more than I probably should. Although I must admit to him that I've changed it from not always jumping into altruist and looking at the numbers to just when I start my day and go through my papers, I check what, the market's doing. If it's in the green, I say, okay, I'm good. If it's in the red, then I kind of pause for a moment and go, darn it. But on that note, I'll start out by saying, as you've always said, we've been through this before, right? And you've published in your, weekly updates, your pursuit. You talk about it all the time. That if you go back over history, you have the ups and downs, and the market always comes back.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm just going to add perspective from my moment in time. That as much as that is very true, and now I start to talk like the old man I'm becoming. And I did look at that. We've been through this before,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I stopped for a moment and said, okay, reflect over your time of your work years and how many of these down times have you truly experienced?
Mm-hmm.
So for me, since I kind of, really started working, it was the early 80s, right? Well, 78, graduated college, then we started. I don't count those first couple years, first couple years out of college, you're
Mm-hmm.
still trying to figure things out, not making a lot of money, not saving a bunch. But I've been through 10 of these big down cycles.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we worry about inflation today. What's inflation now? It's like 6 something.
I think it's like still around 8.
So around 8.
I mean, it's trending down.
See, I'm trying to tell you, I'm not paying too close attention.
Mm-hmm.
But in the 80s, when I was just really starting into the career years and starting to make, in the 80s, we had inflation at 14.6%.
Mm-hmm.
So I can say, hey, I lived through a crazy time, crazier than what we're experiencing today.
What was the first mortgage rate you had?
The forced mortgage, I was just going to say, that did stop me from us making the move into our first home. So I had to hold off on that because that mortgage rate at that was like almost 16 or so percent.
Right.
But when I bought our first house, the first mortgage rate was like 10.
Mm-hmm.
And then shortly after I could refinance and come down,
Mm-hmm.
such. So yeah, it was kind of crazy
Mm-hmm.
times. So I survived it. Then we had things like, I remember this one, Black Monday in 1987. The reason I remember that one was having to be in a meeting with a bunch of executives, and news about the market crash was starting to come through. And of course, all these guys, senior executives, big money,
Mm-hmm.
big stock portfolios. Meeting kind of came to a pause. They all left the room and, checking stuff out.
Well, think about even then, how different it was, though. Like, if that happened today, it'd be on our phones. We'd all see it right away. So even though these execs were they were probably finding it out, hours later. Maybe you had to go from, all right, it's happening on Wall Street. It's got to get to the brokers. Then that gets to the stockbrokers. And then that gets to the clients. Versus now, like CNBC would be broadcasting it live.
Yeah.
Which in some ways probably saved a lot of people because, Black Monday was relatively short-lived. And if most people weren't around executives who had money in stocks and got the calls from the stockbrokers, they may not have found out to the next day's news when they got the paper.
Right.
And maybe by then things had calmed down a little bit. They didn't overreact. So not only have you experienced it, but just like the experience over time has changed.
Right. And then also, the point for me today on our talk is, obviously for me, the perspective is much different. I mean, even those major events happened during those times and the markets dove, I didn't have a lot, at risk at that point in time,
Mm-hmm.
So, but for me now, sitting in this perspective, looking at it and looking at the nest egg, it's, it's like, okay, get a little more nervous only because, if it loses the percent, I still have years to kind of wait, back to your point of, you're in it for the long haul, because for me, it's about the longevity, and I can't and don't want to start taking distributions because I can't yet. I mean, I'm not at that age where I have to start taking my mandatory distributions. So
you can take distributions,
but I don't
you
want
want
to
wait. Right.
Right.
No,
So,
don't say you can't.
But I just want to, try to add the perspective. Yeah, it concerns me from time to time, only because, as you and I have discussed, it's like, well, what can I do to kind of safeguard this? Because it's, it's not a huge nest egg, but for me, it's my my working life savings,
Mm-hmm.
and will need that much later, even though I'm anticipating not having to worry about connecting on that and using that till much later. So I have time for recovery. But I think obviously the perspective is very different depending on where you're at and where our audience may be, whether you're fully in retirement, you're taking distributions, whether you're younger and building, or you're in transition to a new career. For me, just starting out, worrying about it. So your dad, worry a little bit too much about what I can't control and try to control it.
Mm-hmm.
So I do trouble you from time to time. But just to say that, I've lived through, actually, there's been 10 of these in my working career that I lived through. The dot-com bubble. I guess the most perilous bear market was 2007, 2009, which included, of course, the financial crash in 2008. where obviously it lost 50% of the value. But even then, it was like, okay, so it did happen then.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at that point, I was just in my 20s, 30s, 40s. So it's like, well, I'm not going to be touching this money till another 20, 30 years. So I didn't worry too much about what was happening then.
Mm-hmm.
Versus today, I worry about it a little bit because, well, may I have to tap it earlier? I've had the good fortune of you allowing me to join RLS Wealth and helping out and making a little bit there to help out, subsidize what's going on and not touch things. So being very comfortable, thanks to you. But also, it's a matter of, well, I do want it to get better.
Mm-hmm.
So worrying about what do I do, and during these times, I'm trying to avoid the noise. It is a matter of being a little more cognizant of what's happening now, even though I do believe you are right in that continue to worry about the long haul, forget a lot of the noise, because that's just what we do today in our wonderful world of instantaneous news and shaking things up. Plus the market seems to be, to me, not reacting the same way it might have 20 years ago. When you think about our unemployment's still rather low, there's still good wages, good jobs, people are making money. Yeah, there's inflation, but obviously nowhere near where we've been. And maybe this is a sign of the times too, that maybe this is the level of inflation we may have to live with, because just the world is different. Certainly not enough an expert to talk on that level, and don't want to even try to venture into that. But I think it's a matter of, obviously at this phase, worrying about that little side nest egg of how you need to be concerned about that, because that is part of our retirement of being comfortable. Mm-hmm. Even though I'm still making adjustments to other phases, but they're all positive phases. So it is kind of crazy to think, yeah, just as I decide to make the choice and jump in, this happens. But I also think it's part of what you need to understand, that you can't wait to do things. Mm-hmm. So like everything else, they say like you wait to get to a certain level before you have kids, you may never have kids, because mm-hmm. you never can afford it, and so you do things then. Buying that first house, you're always leery about doing it and a little bit over your head, but you still do it. Mm-hmm. The same for retirement and moving into that next phase. Or if it's not retirement, then if you're thinking about transitioning to a new career or going out and starting your own business, I think you still have to be solid, have the right discussions with your financial advisor, do what you can to be cautious, but you got to do it for your own sake. Mm-hmm. Because like everything, we're never guaranteed tomorrow, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, we only know what we know today, and that's living in the present. We talked about that in past episodes of living in the present, not worrying about yesterday because it's gone, future we don't know. It's brought home every day because, in this past month, we've had our neighbor undergo surgery to remove his lung because of cancer. And he's still kind of coming through it. Had an industry friend at the same time find out that he had to have brain surgery to correct a condition that happens with the capillaries, how the capillaries interact with the veins and arteries, and he had to have that done. Plus, at the same time, he's learned he's in early stages of Parkinson's. So it's like, my goodness. Now, he was older. My friend from the industry is older. Our neighbor is younger. And then last evening, I get an email from someone I'm still in touch with, one of the companies I worked with, where a colleague just retired at 67, was going to have a hip replacement. Blood work comes back to him. He's stage 4 brain, liver, and lung cancer. And he only has a short time. Mm-hmm. So again, not to bring in a downer, but the idea is we have to do what's right for us now and do the right things, but be aware of what we need to do and not worry so much about it. So in as much as I've lived through these times and know that things will get better, my only deep concern at this phase of my life is because I'm here. I also, in those early phases, like I said, those years of working, had the luxury of, I'll say, some safety nets, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, had the company match. So even when the market was down, even though I was in my 20s, the 30s, 40s, 50s, I still had that little bit of, well, okay, it's okay that it's down because my contributions were being matched by the company. So you kind of have that. Plus, when we had bonuses, when I got bonuses, then some of that money went into long term. So now company match, bonuses, raises, that's all gone once we hit this phase. Mm-hmm. So you kind of lose that little bit of, we'll say, good feeling that even though things are down, you're still kind of making some inroads and it'll return even better. Versus now, if it's down, I'm not making up for it in great leaps, right? Because if I'm at X and the market drops me down to Y, I'm not having that incremental add in because I don't have it, right? I don't have company match. I don't have the luxury of a bonus coming if and when we got bonuses, kind of in April. And then the last company I was with, they did a great thing. When you got a bonus, they took a percentage of your bonus and dropped that into the 401k. You didn't have a choice. They just, here's your bonus, X percent. They dropped into your company 401, plus it was matched. That was a wonderful thing. So you don't have that. So your feeling about that little nest egg starts to get a little bit more concerning from time to time. So, for me, it's a matter of making sure that I'm doing the right things, because that's all I can do is be prepared. So I put my faith in my financial advisor, and he keeps me going strong, and that's where I've got to be. But admittedly, that's a big one of the other big adjustments, right? We've got to worry about how do we make up for that, and what can we do to be satisfied. But I think that's just a part of this growth of understanding how to get comfortable. And for me, like all the other adjustments I've made, it's a way for me to get comfortable with something that takes me out of that comfort zone, right? Of saying and believing that, hey, you got another, right, Jay, another, before the mandatory distribution is 72 now, may go to 75. So if I'm lucky enough and wait for that, it's still a good 6-7 years to recover what's been happening over the last year. And that should be good, versus whatever. Now, of course, if, doomsday happens or things continue like they say, then obviously, a little bit of a nest egg for you and Kristen from the inheritance is less on that category than others. But, that's all right.
First off,
but
who's saying what when you say the doomsday, what they say? So who's saying what, and what is their credibility? And those people don't know anything more than anybody else. And the best thing we have is to go back and look over history, what happens. And to your point, history, markets recover, we go through cycles, recessions are normal. Doesn't mean they're fun, but that the doomsday comment, that those people who say those things are their motivation for saying those stories and having those narratives, which are one of infinite possibilities that could possibly happen, is they're selling a newsletter, they're selling a book, they've got something to sell that's not going to be in your best interest. And secondarily, one of my frustrations with my profession is there's no accountability for what is said. So you can go on the news, you can write an article and put out these wild, outlandish stories that you can piece together in your mind and say, well, that could be a possibility. And if that person's wrong, they can write another letter, another article in the future. Like I think it should be, if you make a bold prediction, then you should be so comfortable in making that prediction that if you are wrong, you are banned from publishing anything for 12 months. And if you took that ability away from gaining attention by sensationalizing headlines to get people to pay attention and click or buy your newsletter, if you took away just that, let me shock them to get them to click, I bet those predictions would be a lot different. They'd be a lot more muted and more realistic. And the truth always is in the middle, because you have people who are just as on the other end. They're not the pessimistic, they're the overly optimistic, and they're painting all these rosy pictures. So the truth is in the middle, but I think those doomsday people, there needs to be more accountability because they're never right. And let's just say they happen to be right. What are your options at that point? You have that's why investing and sticking with your portfolio and sticking to your plan, I think, is the best course of action, because in that very, very small likelihood that, the Roman Empire of the United States crumbles, where's your money safe? Because if the stock market's going to zero and never recovering, which is our fear, which is unrealistic fear, especially if you're invested in a diversified portfolio of thousands of companies across the globe. If those thousands of companies across the globe go to zero and never recover, what could you have done? Because that means the banks, the insurance companies, Apple, Amazon, McDonald's, Walmart, all of those companies are gone. If the banks are gone, your money in the bank didn't matter. If your money's under the mattress, at that point, it's hopefully you have land and you have ammunition and you have a skill that you can barter with people because the system is gone. what's the point of spending time and energy trying to plan for that scenario that even if you planned for it, there's nothing you can do unless you sold everything and bought land and ammunition and canned food and whatever it might be. And now you're sitting on all these things for this one and an infinite possibility that probably won't happen that then blows things up on the other side. So I think it's prudent to talk through like, well, what if this happened? Well, here's that what if. Well, what can we do about it? All right, nothing. So let's stick with the course of action that historically leads us in the direction where we would expect things to go. And if we're wrong, then we adapt. Going back to your comment of, you don't check as much as you used to. When you were checking, and even when you checked the news to see, was it green or red, what did checking do? Did it change anything in your life?
Yeah.
Nothing. It changed nothing.
Yeah,
no, it didn't.
It changed my comfort level of saying, okay, and for someone like me, at this point in my life, and that's what I'm presenting, but also I kind of run that in parallel to someone who's thinking about a transition to something, whether a transition to another job, transition to start out on their own, transition to, somewhere else or whatever. I think it's just that level of comfort, right? Just like when I was younger, the idea, I knew that it was long-term, that's why I was in it. As you well know, my learning to invest and whatnot was driven by what was just around me, right? I mean, my dad, your grandfather, he didn't have a lot of investment. His investment was the store, and unfortunately, that story we don't need to retell, but because of the bad situation that happened there, and he lost it, in a very negative way, he lost everything. But one thing he always said to me was, you pay yourself first. So the idea, once I started working, taking a percentage, before the 401k became available in the corporate world, percentage always went into savings, right off the top, and then as I got raises, I took half of my raises and increased what I was saving, so forth and so on. Then as I got married and Mom and I came out and we started a life and we're around Uncle John, he shared his philosophy, which was very conservative, and I kind of followed that as such. So nowhere did I get kind of the advice to, go do this and that. And I always chuckle at myself thinking, damn, that first company, I always, as you remember, go out to visit our regional offices and work with the people there. And, I think back to the day when, go to Seattle, and they would come pick me up in the morning. The young lady, my colleague, would pick me up. She's, I got to stop and get my coffee. Starbucks. She talked about, I have to get my mocha, whatever it was she got, and I thought, so I got a cup one day. And it's like, I can't, I'm not much of a coffee drinker, even though I have some. It's like, there was Starbucks. So I, over time, I always jest and go, why wasn't I smart enough to think about, well, again, it was just in Seattle at that time and for a number of years. And then the first time, it moved out of Seattle, was I smart enough to think about, well, how crazy it was in Seattle that people were paying, at that time it was like $2 something for one of their cups versus $5 or $6 or $7, whatever it is today. So I think about that. And then I also think about when I got involved with the industry and going on those committees, and we'd have subcommittee meetings again in Seattle. And we had a partnership with, at the time, Microsoft. And it's like, why wasn't I smart?
Like how many other companies? But how many other companies were you exposed to in that scenario, in those similar scenarios that never amounted to anything?
Oh, exactly.
It's so hard to go back, and hindsight's always obvious. Like,
but I mean, just so funny. But I mean, just the idea of comfort. So, my point is that, in as much as we've talked about the phases of retirement and in our past episodes about my progress or me trying to point out my experience to help folks kind of get comfortable with making a transition, be it to retirement, the Encore, or to a new job, new life, starting on your own. All I'm saying is that this economic piece, right, back to your mantra, you got your spirit, mind, body, and then there's still the money part. For me, the money part is, okay, it's just the economy that we're in. We've lived through, as I said, I lived through 10 of these pretty big chunks. But there, the comfort level was okay because I was younger. Perspective was different. Now perspective is different.
Hold that thought. We're going to go to a quick commercial while I reset these cameras, and then we'll come back because I have things to say about that. Hey there. Now, as I get the cameras all fixed up so we can keep this conversation rolling, I want to take a moment and promote the book, More Than Money. My dad kindly mentioned it earlier in the podcast, but I want to draw your attention to it one more time. More Than Money becomes available on March 21st. You can pre-order it now if you go to morethanmoneybook.com. That'll take you out to Amazon to be able to get your copy reserved. What is the book? Why would you want it? Well, the book is a compilation of stories from advisors inside the AGC. The AGC stands for Advisors Growing Through Community, and it is an online community for financial advisors that I co-founded with my colleague, Taylor Schulte. We started it back in 2019. We've been doing a lot of great things, and last year the community came together, decided we wanted to write a book to share real stories of financial planning so people can see what real planning looks like and compare that to the stereotypes they might have been told or maybe even experienced in their own lives. A great book, a lot of great advisors, and a great cause. All of the proceeds of the book on the AGC side, shout out to our publisher Harriman House. They've got to get paid, but our side of the equation is going to be going to organizations within the profession. Foundation for Financial Planning, the BLX internship program. We are taking our proceeds and rolling them back into the community to move the profession forward. So the AGC makes nothing. The authors make nothing. We were just able to put out a book with a lot of great stories about what real financial planning looks like. So if you're interested, head on over to morethanmoneybook.com or just go straight to Amazon, search my name and More Than Money to make sure you get the right book and pre-order yours. I have a personal goal that I want to see all of the authors on the back of this book. I want to see their names up on a bestsellers list, and that is done by pre-orders and first week sales. So if you can help me get them to that status, I would greatly appreciate it. morethanmoneybook.com. March 21st, grab your copy and let us know in the comments down below when the book comes out your favorite chapter. All right, let's get back to this great conversation with my dad.
Like the different experiences based off of your stage of life definitely play into all this. And it is more psychological. But there are also some things that you can do, especially as you get in retirement or close to retirement, to kind of help with the emotional side of things, but also be strategic from a planning standpoint. So you're right. As you were younger and saving and accumulating, like down markets are what you hope for. Everything's on sale. Let me buy more. Now your mentality shifts in some respect, thinking, okay, now I'm retired. I don't have as much time. I'm not going to be able to have this recover. And you mentioned that, you've got hopefully another 30 plus years ahead of you. So you still have the same time horizon, if you will, for a good majority of your savings as you did at the beginning of your career. So you were comfortable knowing, hey, I've got 30 years before I need these funds. I'm not going to worry about it. Well, you've got 30 years before you're going to need some of these funds, but some of them you're going to need in the short term. So I can't speak to what all advisors do, but this is a big part of working with an advisor, is structuring the portfolio, not only for your risk tolerance, because that's important. You've got to be able to stomach the ups and downs and stomach when you log into Altruist and see what the portfolio value is and not get so upset that you force yourself to sell. So you have to have the right risk tolerance. But risk tolerance is a funny thing because that is a at the moment conversation, meaning your risk tolerance not only changes throughout your career, it changes throughout the year. It changes throughout the month, depending on what's going on in your life. Your tolerance for risk can be impacted by a number of things, not just the stock market. So risk tolerance, it's a tricky thing to try to go, but overall, it's about having the portfolio in a situation where you're not going to get so spooked that you're going to sell, which is usually the worst time to do it. But the other thing is, when you get to the retirement phase, is making sure that you have enough conservative, shorter-term investments that may still fluctuate some, will earn some interest, so you're earning a little bit of money, but aren't going to be in the market. You can determine what's the right amount for you. Could be 6 months, could be a year, could be 18 months, 2 years, whatever it is. But then that way you can look at your portfolio and say, all right, 2022, the market's down, 20%. Diversified portfolios down 14, 15%. So not super, super scary, but also not great. But the good thing is my next year's worth of monthly distributions that I know I'm going to have are sitting in cash and short-term bonds. So the funds I need in the next 2 years aren't even in the market right now, which allows the other part of your portfolio at least 2 years to recover. And in 2 years, we don't know what's going to happen, but in 2 years, you would like to think that at least some of the recovery has come back. There's no guarantee to that, but if you go back and look at a stock market chart, very rarely do we have multiple years in a row where we're down. It can happen. 2007, 8, that was there. There's 3 years there. There's another period. Right. I'm thinking of the S&P 500 chart. I show clients all the time. So it is possible to have multiple years, but most of the time that's not the case. So now you've given yourself the emotional capacity to look at that portfolio and say, all right, I'm down 15%, but next year and a half, 2 years of income is flat, maybe down a little or up a little. So I don't have to lose sleep knowing where's my money going to come from for the next 2 years. I know where it's from. And then if all things go as what we've experienced, as that portfolio begins to recover, you rebalance and you take some of those recovering gains, you put them back into the cash. You always maintain this window of cash and short-term type of investments or whatever fits for you, CDs, fixed annuities, whatever works for your plan, but that you can go to bed every night knowing that your next amount of time of income is not tied to the market.
Right.
The funds that are tied to the market are for you in 3, 4, 5 years, which now gives you a little bit more of a comfort level. And if you go look at history, the longer you give yourself time, the more likelihood you're going to come out ahead. And while there's 5-year periods where the market was down or you wouldn't have, it's a very small percentage. I haven't looked at the charts, but it used to be maybe like 90% of the time in a 5-year period you'd be up. You go to 20 years, and I don't think there's ever been a 20-year period where the market was down. There's been a couple 20 years where it wasn't much higher, but you weren't worse off. So
Yeah.
I think that that's a big part of what you can do in a transition. And if your transition's not retirement, then it's building up cash savings to navigate whatever transition you're going through. So then again, if you have money that's in the market, you're not relying on those funds to do this thing that you need to do. And that's where the planning, and that's where the spirit, mind, body, and money comes into consideration. For me, the money is the last part, because if you align those 3 other things, money ends up taking care of itself as far as fitting into what you need it to be. That doesn't necessarily mean it takes care of you make more money if you need more money, but the role of money in your life becomes more clear when you have those 3 things lined up. And that is no matter what stage of life that you're in. And then I also think that when you have those 3 things lined up and your money's in line with those, when we have surprises and we have to adjust the plan, it's okay, because you're adjusting it within the things that matter the most to you. Sure. And that's one of the comments I wanted to say, is that I think there's this false expectation that because you plan for retirement, you save properly, you run the Monte Carlo analysis, you've got the financial plan, you've got the charts, and it says you're on track for retirement. It says that you can retire. That doesn't mean that the retirement vision you have in your mind that you've always planned for is guaranteed to be what you have. And I think if we can, separate ourselves from this image of what our retirement's going to be over a 30-year period and go back to focusing on retirement in the present moment, that if, let's just say, inflation does stay high, and let's just say that we have a Japan-like experience where we have 20 years where the markets do nothing. For me, I'd be okay because I'm still saving and investing, and in that nothing, there's spikes. But for you, that nothing is not great because your portfolio does nothing, and inflation is going to keep going up. If we had that, there are adjustments that you would make within your daily living that would not lead to a unhappy life, that would still allow you to be in a good position. Like, we adapt. It may not be what we want, but when push comes to shove, you're going to adapt and change things. Life changes to fit within the constraints that we have. And I would love to say that everybody's retirement gets to go the way that they want. What I've experienced, and maybe that isn't always the truth, but what I've experienced is, in 18 years, I've never seen somebody's retirement not go the way they want to because they didn't have enough money. Retirement doesn't go the way that's not supposed to because of life events that you just described. I wrote about one with one of my clients. He retired, and ever since he's retired, he's had health issues, and now he's moving into a long-term care facility. I go over to his house to help set up some paperwork, and he doesn't look at me the whole appointment. The whole meeting, he can't look at me. And then he looks at me and says, "This isn't how I thought retirement was going to be." It's not because of his money. It's because of health.
Right.
So, again, money in most situations, assuming you have enough for your essential needs. If you don't have money, if you are living in poverty, then this next statement doesn't apply. And that's not fair, but that's just what it is. But for most people that get past that threshold, and in the U.S., compared to the world, the majority of our U.S., even the ones that are not doing as well as the higher ends, are still doing better than most people in the world. But when you get past that bare essentials and getting past that point, if you look back through your life, it may not seem like it in the moment, but money, when you focus on the right things, the things you can control, money ends up working itself out. And sometimes you may have to go back and dig yourself out of a hole. So maybe you lose your job, and for a period of time you've got to use credit cards for some essential needs, or you've got to dip into your 401k to make a mortgage payment. Those aren't the things you want to do, but it gets you by, and you get to the other side of whatever this event is, and now you're able to pay that credit card down. You're able to rebuild your savings. You get through and you adapt, and we always do that. Like we're genetically wired to survive. Whether that be out in the wild, figuring out how to survive, or if it's how to navigate this event that's going on in our life that impacts our finances. And where I think we cause more harm to ourselves is we overcomplicate things. We want to try to fix it ourselves and rush through, and that makes the problem worse rather than going back to focusing on what we can control, processing all the emotions that go with that. I always worry that sometimes it makes it seem like I skip over the negative emotions that someone might feel during a transition. Even if it's a positive transition, there's always emotions. Process those emotions, get through them, and then focus on the things you can control, and things recenter. You find a new north, you move forward, and you end up being in good shape. Yeah. Most of the time. Now, there's always those outliers where there's something like an addiction or a gambling problem or a spending problem that's self-induced. The things that are out of our control, whether it be economy or jobs, like those things happen. If we can process them, refocus and move forward, things end up working themselves out, and it ends up leading you down the path that maybe you're supposed to be on anyways. If we just kind of step back and relinquish a little bit of control and just allow things to work themselves out and follow that. Yeah. And that's where the alignment of spirit, mind, and body, I believe, helps all of that happen.
Yeah. I think your point is spot on, Jay. I think, again, for us in this phase of our life, it still is about adapting, right? In our previous episodes, we talked about preparing for retirement, living a new life, because now retirement is much different than past retirements, mm-hmm. right? And in the past retirements, and I you can only speak of what you know. For me, retirement when I was growing up was, again, as you well know, back home, it was guys in the steel mill. You worked to a point in time, you retired, you had a full mill pension that included health benefits. You saved along the way. You lived in a small steel town where you didn't do a whole lot of anything, mm-hmm. except small things. So that was it. Retirement was you,
and you lived to 70.
And you lived to 70 or 80, or if you were blessed, like thankfully our family was blessed, people lived well older. But
but if you look at the life expectancy averages back then,
yeah.
But in the whole concept of retirement, even down to Social Security, is a old vision that was never adapted for the changes in technology and medicine and longer live. Like Social Security, when it was initially set up, like you weren't even supposed to draw it. I should memorize this, but like when it started, I think life expectancies were like 60, and it was designed to be drawn at 62. And now 62, that age has never changed as the earliest year you can draw it. And yet we're living until late 90s, and you have people who are trying to optimize their health to live well past 100. So like this vision of go to work, retire at 55, and never work again under the assumption you lived to 65 or 70 has never been adopted. So why wouldn't it be more realistic to say, all right, you work until a lot later in life because you're going to live longer, and then maybe the definition of a career is you've got your traditional 30-year career, and then you have a 10-year victory lap where you do something part-time, and then you go into the traditional sense of retirement at age 71 or 72. Now you take your RMDs, you've maximized Social Security, you've given your investments an extra decade or more to compound and grow and to save into, and now the time you're trying to fund is 20 or 25 years instead of 35 or 40 years. Right. So like we have this vision we've been sold that we buy into that isn't realistic. Yeah. And even to the standpoint of it's not realistic that it's healthy to be done working at 55 or 60 and do nothing.
Right. And we talked along those lines as well, Jay, right? I mean, even though it's not like you described, even if we take it to the next level of saying, as we've been speaking, you have to rethink what retirement means, mm-hmm. right? It's no longer just, as you just said, you work to a certain age, you're going to live a short period of time, and then, you're maximizing life is fine, you're not going to do much. Even if we take it to the new version where you we're doing what you described, right?
Mm-hmm.
You work longer, you do the right things, you have some part-time work to subsidize. As we've also learned, people that have taken retirement at a younger age, many of them begin to realize, I really don't want to retire.
Mm-hmm.
Even I went ahead and retired. We have stories like this all around us. You may even know people that have, met this phase of life, decided to give it up, and then found out, hey, I don't really like it.
Mm-hmm.
I miss the work. I miss the identity that my life was given when I worked, because for many of us, our identity was given by the work we did.
Mm-hmm.
I can say I felt guilty to that. I mean, a lot of my identity was the fact that I left, our small steel town world, came into Indianapolis, became a part of the white collar world, had some great things happen to me for a lot of different reasons, and doing a lot of wonderful things. So my identity was boosted because of that. And now that I'm done with that world, yeah, there is a piece of your identity that's stripped. But for me now, the identity is much better.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I love the identity I had during my corporate time for lots of reasons, but now my identity is better because I'm doing all of this for me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about Mom and I getting back to where we were. Back.
Mm-hmm.
You can almost say you're kind of starting your life over again. Because now it's just us again, like it was when we started out. So you're doing a lot of different things, but it's also like, as we've been speaking, and I want to, it's like a quote Harry Truman would say is like, there's really nothing new, but the history you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of like what we've got here. We talked about, my 10 sessions in my lifetime, the history that you always publish about the market and the down times and coming back is like, none of that is new. Mm-hmm. Right? If we don't know it, then we don't understand it. So that's part of what you're saying as well, too. You have to understand it in order to feel comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the adjustment I'm making. And I think it's important for all of us, because retirement is different. We've talked about redefining how you retire, making it to the Encore, living a different kind of life.
Mm-hmm.
And, that reference to that different kind of life is what I found was a good thing was Cynthia Covey Haller. The name Covey may sound familiar to folks because her father, Stephen Covey, who was at Seven Habits of
Effective People. Yeah, I think
Effective
there's a couple
People.
of the books like that he wrote.
But her book is called Live Life in Crescendo. And that's the kind of the upbeat, right? You high energy, you put a lot of value into it, versus the opposite, of that is everything is slowed. It starts out strong, but then it slows. And then eventually you lose your energy, you lose the power, and then it ends. Kind of like the early ways of retirement is in the opposite of that, living life in crescendo, right? Because you came in strong, but then again, you just kind of wound down and your life went away from you. So we have to learn to live it strong, learn to reinvent ourselves, do the things that we spoke to earlier about redefining this retirement time, doing the things that you've always wanted to do, taking your little, connective session that you ran, learning to seek that creator and doing the little writing, starting the blog that I'm starting, from that effort of yours, is a great thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the idea of doing some things I've never done before, and it's a good piece of that.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's also, you've got to worry about that comfort level of being able to do things, and so that's why I wanted to start into you still have to worry about that little nest egg and what you're doing and the impact it has on you. And just for those listening in, what we've talked about this morning on this recording is to relax with that. Is my message, because it will have a way of working out. Just like you said, if I think back over our life, right? As I started working, and we did have the ups and downs, you always have ups and downs in life. You're right, what you said. You do make adjustments.
Yeah, you push back the vacation a year.
Yeah,
you don't
exactly.
buy.
You don't do that kind of stuff, or you do this or that, or you wait. So the same thing is true now, even though things are better, because obviously there are less expenses in life, because fortunately I was able to do that. When the time came, all I have is, a little bit still on the mortgage of the house, and everything else is just daily living. So it's a comfortable time, and we can do the things. But as you said, I've also looked at stuff and retooled kind of like some of the services that we have going on to cut those expenses out. Kind of, we'll say the more luxurious stuff like quit the mosquito service, quit getting those unless I really need it, versus just having them happen automatically. Because when you're working, it's like, okay, those fit the budget. And now it's like, well, we don't really need it. Probably didn't need it then either. But did it just because, well, grandkids were over running around outside because it's just the nature of our neighborhood. It's like, you don't want them running around outside and being bothered by the little mosquitoes and such. So you just do it because you can. But now it's like, well, I don't need that anymore. Same thing with lawn service and other things. So yeah, you make, like you said, you make those adjustments. And in this phase, it's still, like you said, it's just a comfort level of someone like myself who've said, hey, I've worked pretty well and done where I'm at. And just the idea that you don't want to see that drop. But admittedly, even though, like I've said, I've been watching it, yeah, the market's dropped and I've lost my percentage, but we've had those few good runs where, you saw the numbers kind of go back up. You felt real good about it, but now they're back down. So it's like you said, it's just the ebb and flow of it and not worrying about it. And I think that's the key is to be comfortable with this phase and recognizing that if you do step back, it's no different than what you did when you were younger. It feels different because you're older and you think you have a shorter period of time. But again, we never know how long our period of time is unless it's, thrust upon us in one big swoop. But I think we have the luxury of recognizing that we can live a good life and we need to focus on those other pieces of life. Like I said, part of it is taking care of your health. And so as I've, added, Mom and I have added yoga to our routine, we've always had a good exercise routine, as you know, but we've now been able to throw yoga in there for the first time, and that's been good. And I can report that I've hit my first goal. I can now put my palms on the ground in a standing forward position now, so I can get my little bit of flexibility back.
One of the things I
some
love
of the
about
other, some of the other poses, I'm never going to get them done. But
well, one of the good things, speaking about yoga and like stage of life, one of the things that they talk about where I go is that one of the first things that leaves us when we get older is our balance. So that through yoga you strengthen your ability to balance, and you think about like the injury that seems like it shouldn't be a death sentence, but for so many people it is like the broken hip. Well, the reason most people fall is because they don't have balance. So like of all the there's all these things that yoga does. It's the stretching and the strength that comes with it, the mindfulness, but also, I look at it as I'm just keeping my balance strong for life. So even if you never get those positions down, the incremental improvements that you do are helping your balance, which will keep you upright longer in life.
Yeah, and I say that just a little bit in jest, but it is part of what I want folks to understand about this phase is it now gives you that opportunity, to kind of part of your routine. The fact that now my day starts, instead of waking up in the morning and worrying about, okay, what happened overnight, obviously because we had a service center, in the other part of the world. So when you did wake up in the morning, there were crises as soon as I got in and turned on the laptop. And so the morning was always, oh, what the heck happened overnight? And then immediately jumping into putting out, fires. Where now the morning starts, do a little bit of meditation, kind of learning that technique and starting that, doing some work for our less wealth when necessary, getting exercise in. So the routine is good. It's a better routine, which helps. So I can just turn off that piece of me that still worries too much about, what's kind of going on in the world, the noise part. But that's always been me. I've always had an interest in worldly matters. I've always had an interest in trying to understand the economy and politics more. But I'll say, the only thing that's a little different from our past, even though we say nothing's new, as Harry Truman would say, it's only the history. And we talk about the 10 times that I experienced it. We are living, obviously in a very different time. And we have more crazies, I think, than in the past.
We probably do, but
but only in this sense. They're more available, and their words are causing more reaction.
What is that? You hear about it more, and then you get more copycats.
Right, and then you have a problem with it. So, like I said, if I can dial that down, and that's my problem, folks. I mean, that's not necessarily your problem, but one of the hardest pieces for me in this transition of dialing everything down and reinventing myself and making myself at peace with everything in this new life of mine is to be able to turn that stuff off. I mean, I'm getting better at it.
You know what's the
but
easy
the
way to
problem
do it?
is, I like it.
No,
I
what's
mean,
easy to do is
not listen.
Well, yeah, fill your day with other activities that you enjoy more.
Yeah, but I do. The only thing is, if you have an interest in wanting to learn more about the world or the economy, you can't just, because you have to read.
Yeah,
right? I mean,
reading. I think reading is better than watching and listening.
Oh, I agree with you.
Because at least with reading, like most of it, even though there could be tilts to it, depending on where you're reading, it's not as dramatic as the shit you see on.
Well, absolutely.
24-hour TV. Like that was one of the worst things that was ever created because they have to fill 24 hours. So it's also all filled with junk. And they've being the people in control of all this stuff have figured out like how to pull people in and how to use tribalism and create people to pick sides, and then that's the narrative they want to hear. Like that's all like there's a lot of psychology that sits behind all of that. That's why that is structured the way it is.
Right.
So yeah, reading it wouldn't be bad to understand. I mean, I scroll through Twitter to get an idea of but I don't even really read all the details. I just get the headlines and get an understanding of what's going on and then move on.
Yep.
And the rest of my day is filled with clients and family and writing and creating and reading stuff that's going to help me grow. Because at the end of the day, it's important for me to know what's going on. And I have an understanding of what's going on in the economy and details within that and in the world. But after a certain point, those details do not impact my life. They do not impact my ability to work for my clients. It's all noise.
Yep.
And it's a distraction. And for a lot of people, it impedes on their happiness. And you look at the perspective that becomes your reality and how many people are living in a world today that's filled of doom and crime and hate and all this negative stuff. And while that stuff exists, there are people who live in a world that are happy and see all the good. And it's shaped by, one of it's your just natural disposition, but also shaped by the stuff you consume.
Right.
Like if you're going to read and listen to doom and gloom all the time, that's all you're ever going to see. And then that's what your experience is going to be. Or you can choose not to be naive, but have an understanding of what's going on, big picture, know that Russia invaded Ukraine and understand that that's going on and what could be the implications of that. But you don't need all of the crap that goes on underneath all that. Just understand the headline and what that could mean. What has that done? What has happened other times there's been invasions throughout history, and then move on. You don't need all the details. You don't need to see the pictures and like for what? That doesn't change your life. So focus on the things that change your life and make it better, not all of the things that create a distraction. And then that I'm not a conspiracy person, but like the thought process I've been going through over the last year does lead me down to more of like why we get fed the things we get fed. And it's to keep a lot of us in line with room to roam, but in line. Yeah. And we're going to feed you all of this stuff, so you keep distracted on this and you don't go follow your passions, which could lead you to go do something greater that could be a threat to somebody else. Like, I genuinely believe people are good, but I also think that there are systems in place and things that we're taught to direct the majority in a direction that serves, other people more.
Yeah, I certainly agree, and I'm with you too. When my routine now, and as it always been,
I don't even check the weather. I don't even check the weather. I just wake up.
Spoken from a kid who always would look at the weather and stand at the door and look outside to see what was going on.
But now I'm like, I don't like. Angel wake up and Angel asked me like to get Silas ready. Like, what's the weather gonna be? I don't know. I can't control it. It is what it is. So I'm going to wake up and I'm going to see what the weather is. And I also know that 90%, that's too harsh on the meteorologist. Half the time they're going to be wrong anyways. So
yeah, you're going to look outside and see what it's saying as such. But yeah. Hey, on that note, we do have to close out because we are kind of at our time limit, and you got some things coming up here quickly. So all I want to close on as we always do is this is an opportunity for us to have people start to cut through the noise, me to share the experiences, maybe help those who are transitioning. Today was about, the economic piece, the monetary part of the adjustment phase that I've been going through and what my experience has been and what I need to still continue to do. But the upside of it is that we have people to go through to help us through that. And that's the key for us, especially on this time of our life and where we need to be. Because I do think has to be more adjusting to help us be comfortable in order to enjoy all those other pieces that we're changing, right, in the different phases. So just like, Santiago and the alchemist, right, the personal legend, you got to keep searching for that. And for the Felix and Mano Diallo's, his journey to try to find out who he is and is looking for his treasure in Egypt and such. That's our life. And our phase, this Encore phase, should all be about that, continuing to find out who we are, right? So on that, as always, Jay, thanks for this opportunity. It's always a lot of fun. And as always, I got to say, right, we never quit searching. We never settle and never give up on seeking a greater purpose. And that, I mean, truthfully to everybody, and enjoy these days. And, have a good one. Thanks for visiting with us. Like us, share us, check out Jay's new stuff. I'll plug him again. That's just the father in me wanting to, plug it and such. So thanks. It's always good, man.
All right. Appreciate it. And we'll see you all in the next episode.